So I've had a viewer reach out and ask me a little bit about my tools and how I make them and all of that. I'm going to fully admit I'm not a very good maker of tools. I'm not a very good Netsuke carver in general. I'm very junior into the art form. But I'll talk a little bit about what I do, my approaches, and some sources that I think will be of help to you to follow up on. I don't have much in the way of files. None of my files are very traditional for Netsuke carving. They're a very specific type of file. Of the carvers I know who still use these kinds of files, off the top of my head, I'm thinking of the carver Yushi. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I'm so sorry if I've gotten his name incorrect. I believe he actually got a blacksmith to make his files in particular, even though he usually makes his own tools. It's a slightly more difficult kind of tool to make. I've never attempted it before, but I will give it a try. In my earlier videos, I was using this file. This file is not great for Netsuke carving. It is incredibly heavy and it's the wrong profile altogether. I used it because that's simply what I had available at the time, and it belonged to my grandfather. He would have used it for some general woodworking or something. I do use it a little bit for tool making. It's useful for that. I've completely retired it for Netsuke carving. Instead, I use this file. It's a woodworker's sculptor's file. I will leave a link in the description, assuming I remember to do so, to the shop that I bought it from, and also assuming it's still in stock. Yeah, these files are really good. So often when I start off a Netsuke, I will saw the Netsuke first, and then I'll then file it into shape to make it easier to hold, and also to sculpt it a little bit as well. There are many different types of files. Files are really underrated tools in Netsuke carving, and amongst the ivory carvers and ivory Netsuke carvers, they really utilize files more than most would. Also, if we look at this is a Japanese sewing chest for the record. It says really getting too small to store all my bits and bobs and things. I have quite a few needle files in this drawer. These are fairly poor quality tools. Let me get that a little bit closer. There we go. I do occasionally use these for Netsuke, not as much as I used to. I actually use these for shaping tools, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. As we look at this, so we've got a mixture of tools that I've bought and obviously tools I've made. Yes. This particular set of Japanese tools is from a set called Tomo, described as a set for Netsuke carving. I'm going to be honest, this is just really a miniature woodworking tool set. A lot of them are tools like skew chisels, things that are not that specific to Netsuke carving. That being said, things change a lot from one carver to the next. These are some of the tools I made myself. As you can see, they're incredibly poor quality. The handles are badly made. The carting profiles, everything are shocking, but they work. So you don't always have to have the best tools for everything. Collectively, these tools, I know some people would refer to the bulk of them as scrapers. I don't really use the term scraper. I find that there's quite a gap between Japanese Netsuke carvers and Western Netsuke carvers. And while obviously I'm a Western Netsuke carver, I find that Westerners tend to talk more about scraping tools. The Japanese talk more about engraving tools. I know that doesn't sound like much of a distinction, but tool-wise they're quite different. I actually learned first to make Western-style tools, but I much prefer the Japanese tools. I'm not saying one is better than the other, relax. I have enormous respect for all Netsuke carvers. But for what works for me, I find the more Japanese-style engraving tools to be overall more suitable. Now, I don't have many tools. I've got more tools in the larger drawer there. That's where I keep some of the bulkier tools. Yet again, not all carvers use this, but it's important. What's important is that we tend to use a tool called the hidariba. So these are both skew chisels, but I'm going to use them to illustrate what a hidariba is. Okay. So if we look at if we look at the anatomy of these chisels, you'll see one side is slightly raised. That's the bevel side. And when we turn them around, they're flat. And yes, I know my tools need a lot of honing and sharpening. I'm just at the tail end of a session and I'm totally exhausted. And I I am yet to have fixed up my tools after this session. So I know. Thank you. Yes. So when we look at the tools, we put them towards us like this. The beveled side, if it's going from the tip to if the top is going from the left here to the right, down like that, it's called a migiba. If it's going from the top here, the right, down to the left, it's called a hidariba. Now this is where it gets confusing. So You turn them around and you look here. This little kanji character means left. So this is our left tool. The hidari bar is a left tool. And I say it's traditional-ish, possibly late 18th century. Well, I think Ryushi said that the development of the hidari bar is late 18th century, but I could be totally wrong. So this is a piece of tar granate. Well, I know you will sometimes see me use the right-handed tool like this, in a sort of that kind of motion, and while I certainly do it like that, typically when I'm doing engraving work and smoothing and all of that, I will use the hidari bar. I'll use the left-bladed tool. In my right hand, I'm a right-handed carver, and it's a scraping motion, scraping or shaving. Yes, can I show how I've done it? I'm trying to get it a bit clearer, sorry. Honestly, filming this stuff is... And the reason why I call it engraving as opposed to scraping, and I prefer to say shaving, even though I've just been saying scraping this whole time, is because of the words that the Japanese use and how they translate it. So this is an example of a hidari bar I made. It's very poorly made. I've barely done any effort, and I'm mostly using this part of it here anyway. And it needs a lot of sharpening. But you see the cutting edge is on the left side. I keep on forgetting it. I forget this piece is upside down. There are so many variations of hidari bar. This is a very small one I made, very badly made. You can still see the marks where I've hammered the what do you call it, the metal. This one I've used for undercutting, and it does very smooth undercutting work. So if you see the detail on the mouth here that I'm starting to work in, that really careful thing was done by this tool. Now, if you are a right-handed carver, yes, you do still use the right-bladed tools. This is a tool I'm currently making at the moment. Now, rather than being used like this, I'm actually going to turn it on its side like this, so sort of upside down. And it's going to be used as a scraping motion like this. So I have to work on the cutting edge along back here rather than this part here. Now I'll show you where I got the whole concept of the Migi bar and Hidari bar. Again, not all Netsuke use it. A lot of the Japanese ones, particularly those who have carved ivory, do use it. So again, it's from that nice book I really love, The Art of Netsuke Carving by Masatoshi. If you don't have this book, I recommend getting it. I know a lot of people dismiss it, and I know it's a bit of a mess, this book. It's not a carving manual. Let's face it, it's a carver's autobiography and a sort of catalogue raisonné, but it's pretty good nonetheless. So if we look here, now this is copyrighted material, and none of this video is commercial for the record. Look, straight, curved and hooked hidari bar knives with their cutting edge on the left. That's more or less what I'm trying to imitate here. Now there are so many variations, infinite amount of variations, because they're all handmade, and each one will have a slightly different purpose. Masatoshi actually I've seen him carving using one a bit like this as well. Very tiny, very minuscule. Yes. Now these are, of course, not the only tools. I use so many different types of tools as well. I'm constantly trying to make tools. Yes, and you can see Masatoshi really used a lot of hidari bar. He didn't use many miki bar, but again, a lot of other carvers like Ryushi do use miki bar quite a bit. Some other tools I use. So this is this one I've seen Japanese carvers and Western carvers use them to in slightly different ways. I don't know what to call it. It's sort of a hybrid between a drill and a chisel. Like that. You can do all sorts of like little detailing little things, like so. It's a tricky thing to control when you're detailing. I know I'm not getting it quite right on the camera, but what can you do? And also I use it to start the drilling process. It's not great for the tool, but it works well. I'll use it to start a hole to drill in, and then I'll use a very rudimentary sort of drill to, or hand driven, to bore a little bit inside of the thing. I'll open it up with some of these other tools, and then I'll use a lot of these other scraping tools to open up holes and things like that. That's more or less what I've done even with this piece. All these little holes and things you see here and all these big gaps, because this was a solid piece of antler, I would have started again with this tool here which again, it's not great using it as a drill, but it does stay reasonably intact, although it does need a good sharpening. I really went to town on it today. Also, here's some other tools, another Hidari bar to reach into very awkward places. This one I barely use at all. It's a new one. I'm still shaping it a little bit. And there's so many tools I'm constantly trying to make. I've also, if you look at this sewing chest here, if you start going through the drawers, you're going to see so many unfinished tools in various stages of completion or lack of completion. As for how I make these tools, I'm going to put a link in the description. This gentleman, I think an American chap off the top of my head, he's done this very interesting video on showing how to make miniature detailing tools. I don't know, something like that. I've taken the theory of that video and I've applied it to Netsuke. So I get fairly long rods from Amazon. I heat them up using a blowtorch. While the tool has been heated by the blowtorch, I hammer it on an anvil using a hammer to flatten the tool a little bit, and then once it's cooled down properly, I will file it using my needle files and some of my larger files as well. To get into those areas and things, and I use another file to shape all along here. Sorry, I'm struggling to keep this thing in focus today. Yes, to get that. This is still not finished shaping. I will work on it, get bored and do something else, and then come back to it, and it goes on forever and a day. That's why I haven't produced that many tools in all this time. I will then heat it, again using a blowtorch, not unlike that one, but it gets it really glowing hot. I can't remember the exact theory behind it, but then you plunge it in oil. I use peanut oil, just like what that chap recommends in the videos I'm putting in the description. Yes. And then it gets quenched in the oil when it's glowing hot, plunged at that precise moment. It hardens the tool. Then it needs to be tempered in an oven. I use a toaster oven, just like the gentleman in that video describes. Yes. I'm not saying it's a great method, but it's not a fussy method. It's something you can actually do at home. Yes. Some of the carvers of old, they would use very specific fires of charcoal and all of this and that and the other. I certainly don't have time for that. I have too many soap operas to watch. Bold and the Beautiful is really getting interesting now, by the way. So that person reached out to me. They wanted me to explain which tools I tend to use more than any other, and honestly, it would change. Sometimes I will often use this one quite a lot, this Hidari bar, but on this Netsuke that I'm currently working on, I've barely used it. Some others, I also use a lot of these tools from the Tomo set. I don't use them as much as I used to. Generally speaking, I don't use gougers. I also don't use power tools as well. That can be its own video. I've got nothing against power tools. They're just not right for me. Okay, I'm not going to get into a whole debate about that. I've got nothing against power tools. It's again just not right for me. The handles, in case you're wondering, this wood is called swamp mahogany or Australian red cedar. It's quite a light wood, strong enough to handle the pressure of carving, which shouldn't be that much pressure if your tools are well sharpened. As you can see, mine are very roughly made. It's a very handsome wood, probably too good for tools, and it's a bit of a waste of wood, but I like it. It's pretty, it's nice. It's local to Australia where I live, so another bonus for me. And I don't really use Australian materials in my carving. I mean, the antler is from a chital deer in Australia, so that's actually pretty nice. But otherwise, nearly everything I have to import. So it's nice to have a wood that's actually from Australia. One thing I didn't realise until recently, so I buy these as pen blanks. They will actually look like a thick block, like this. And then I saw them in half, and then I saw them once again in half. So it's overall in quarters. And when they're apart, I will, this is one of the few times I really use a gouge to make a hole on the inside to fit the tool, and then glue it all back together. I use Gorilla Glue epoxy resin. It's rather good, this one. I even use it for my Netsuke to some extent. Yes. Super strong, gets the job done. Yes. You are going to have to experiment and things, and I'm going to be, it will take me a while. Gradually my tool making will become more refined. I won't be bothering to make the handles any prettier, because what's the point? It's got a nice satiny finish, this wood, and it's very nice in the hands. Oh, this is the whole thing I was trying to get to. Sorry, I go off on a tangent very easily. The supplier of this wood, of the blanks, gave me as a sample camphor wood, a blank of a similar size, and it was very nice of them. And if you've ever worked with camphor before, you'll notice it smells very strongly of Vicks, because I believe some extract or oil or something that comes from the camphor is used to create Vicks, the vapor rub or whatever you call it. So a very strong smell, but that's not the issue I had with it. I didn't realize that camphor wood splinters very easily. So, and because I always hold things in my hand when I'm working with them, as I was working with the camphor wood, I started to get splinters in my hands, and I got the shock of my life because most of the materials I work with don't produce splinters like that. Yes. So that's something else to keep in mind too. Now, this is the sort of shape I use, which again is a very bad imitation of this. I do make it a bit thicker because it's better for my hands. Yes, I hope you enjoyed the video. Yes, and again, I apologize for you having to see such horrendous tools, but at least you see what I'm trying to do and sort of the right places to go to give it a try. Now, again, I'm not saying I've got the best methods or ideas. I'm really just trying to get by myself. You have to do what works for you. You're going to need to use a lot of instinct. There's only so much you're going to get from a book or an online forum. Anyway, if you'll excuse me, I've got a soap opera to watch. Ta-ta.